Hey guys, this is Adina, and we are on break from the Atheists in Recovery podcast, but I thought it would be fun to share some of our most popular episodes, as well as some of my favorite episodes from the Air podcast. We've had over 70 episodes now, and for me, re-listening to these episodes, I always learn something new. So before we get to today's episode, I get asked all the time what my favorite tools are that I'd like to recommend in the recovery space. And it's usually going to start with one or two books. And so I created a free resource, Air's Top Recovery Memoirs. And you can find that by heading over to atheistinrecovery.com/audible. And I hope you find your new best friend in the form of a book today.
Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Hello, Atheists in Recovery, and welcome to episode 51 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And today we have a guest on that I've been looking forward to having on the show for a while now, Mr. John Sheldon. And we talk a lot about AA, what it means to be an atheist in AA, and how he pivoted from his home group when his atheist view was not accepted and what he did next. Let's talk a little bit more about my guest today, John Sheldon. John stopped drinking when he was 25 years old, which was about 32 years ago. And at the time, all that he knew was to go to AA. And that's exactly what he did. After 25 years of attending AA meetings, he realized that he was an atheist. And sadly, his atheistic view of AA wasn't accepted at his home group. So with a friend, he started an AA meeting for agnostics and atheists. This was almost 6 years ago. And today, there are now 6 secular AA meetings a week in Kansas City. In September of 2015, he started the website and podcast AA Beyond Belief, which provides a home for people who travel a secular path to sobriety in AA. They have posted hundreds of stories on their website, and John has recorded over 170 podcast episodes. And he writes, "This website, and in particular the podcast, have absolutely transformed my life." And you could hear the passion in his voice. All right, guys, let's get this show started. John Sheldon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I've been a fan of yours for a while now, and I believe it was our mutual friend Joe C. from Rebellion Dogs podcast that initially told me about you and your podcast.
Yeah, Joe's great.
So I thought I'd start this conversation like I do all of them by inquiring about your spiritual background from childhood.
Well, my parents come from the southeastern United States, a little town in Florida, and they were raised Baptist. And in my very early years, and I mean very early, before I was 6 years old, we would go to church. We'd go to a Baptist church, and my father even taught Sunday school. But my father was military, and he went to Vietnam and came back. And a lot of change occurred in our household when he came back. And one of those is we didn't have anything more to do with religion, which really turned out to be helpful for me because I grew up without any idea of what religion involved. I didn't know the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I knew nothing about religion whatsoever. So I wouldn't have even described myself as an atheist. It was just not anything that I considered. But as you get out into the world, oh boy, all of a sudden religion becomes really important. And
Yes.
that's when it started to become a problem when because I felt like, man, there must be something wrong with me because I can't believe this. I can't believe in a God. But what I did and ultimately is I somehow tried to conform to what I thought other people would expect of me. And, that was it. But much later in life, really about several years ago, I really realized that I'm an atheist, and that's where I'm at today as far as my spiritual beliefs go.
Yeah, and I'm sure this will weave itself into your recovery story. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, about your
Sure.
journey.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I started young and I ended young. I started I started drinking before I was even a teenager. As I said, I grew up in a military family, and my father used to have these huge parties, and all these army people come over and so forth. And boy, as a 8, 9, 10 year old, after these parties, I'd go down and I'd drink the leftover alcohol that was in the glasses after the party. And I didn't know what I was doing, but looking
Mhm.
back on it, I know educating myself even then. Got drunk for the first time when I was maybe 12,
Mhm.
and it was immediately a terrible experience for me. And I immediately had felt the shame of doing what I did, and swore I wouldn't do it again. And I didn't drink till I got into high school. And at that point, this is the 1970s, and most of our parents were happy that we were drinking as long as we didn't do drugs. That was the
Hmm.
deal. And society as a whole didn't have a problem with drinking. For example, we would get beer and drive around in our cars and get drunk basically. And if the police
Mhm.
ever found us, this is back in mid 70s, it was not a big deal. It was just, pour out your beer, boys, and going home type thing.
Mhm.
But what happened with me is my drinking was never really normal, but it just became worse over a period of time. And by the time I was in my well, no, really, by the time I was 19 is when I first thought about getting help. And what happened there was I was in college and I was having problems with drinking and having a life at the same time. And there was an ad for Alcoholics Anonymous in the newspaper, and I thought about going to that meeting. And I just said to myself, "No, I just can't. I'm just too young. This is crazy." And that word alcoholic was really something that prevented me from getting help at that time, because I didn't think that I was an alcoholic. I thought I was way too young for that. So anyway,
Mm.
life got worse, and I ended up living with my parents when I was 20, 21. And my mother committed suicide when I was just shortly after my 21st birthday.
Wow.
And I was there, and it was a traumatic experience for me. And my drinking accelerated from the next 5 years. And so for the next 5 years, I was probably, it's really hard, it's 30 years ago now, so it's hard for me to remember it properly, but I was either drunk or sick from being drunk, and I was constantly
Mhm.
dealing with problems related to my drinking. And so after what happened, I started getting arrested for drunk driving. Now it's the 1980s, and they're taking
Mhm.
drinking and driving a lot more seriously than they did when I was a kid in the 70s. So I got 3 DUIs, and each one was about a year apart. And on that third one, I lost everything. I lost my job
Mm.
and my apartment and everything. And
Mm.
so that's when I decided I needed help, and I went to AA, and I've been sober ever since. And I'm going on, I think it's 1988. So 31 years now, going on 32, I think. I have to do the math. Yeah, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that powerful story. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your experience with AA. And, we've mentioned in talking before that you didn't find a sort of sense of belonging when you went to AA. And I don't know where you were in the process of your recovery, but yeah,
So
you could talk about that.
yeah, so AA really surprised me. So growing up, we all know about Alcoholics Anonymous, and we know it from the movies, we know it from
Yeah.
reading in the newspaper and so forth. But I never knew that there was anything having to do with God in AA.
Mm.
I had no idea. And so at this first meeting that I went to, there's God written all over the walls on his steps and everything. And they pray at the beginning of the meeting, they hold hands and pray at the end of the meeting. On one hand, I felt comfortable that I was in a place where with people who understood me. But at the
Mhm.
end of the meeting, when they held hands to say the Lord's Prayer, I once again felt that sense of being different, because that's not my experience to pray with
Mhm.
people. It's not what I do. I don't do that, and I felt uncomfortable doing that. But my life was so bad that I kept coming back, and I began to rationalize in the beginning the religious aspects of AA, and it can be pretty heavy, and it depends on the
Yeah.
people that you're talking to. But I would rationalize and I'd say, okay, so these people are doing these things, they're praying and have God, all this stuff, and they must be getting some psychological benefit to it. So I even then I was thinking, I didn't even identify as an atheist, but even then I was trying to rationalize what they were doing
Mm-hmm.
in a way that kind of made sense to me. But what's so powerful about Alcoholics Anonymous is that community. And
Yeah.
it's good, but it can also, and it helped me. But what I find disturbing as I look back at my experience was, without knowing it, I began to conform to what I thought the group would want to hear from me.
Mm.
And and in AA you get this internal language, this jargon that I learned to speak. And when I spoke that, people approved. And the heads nodded up and down, he's got it. And I did that for a long time. And after 25 years in AA, I finally came to the conclusion that I was an atheist. And I thought about the program and I looked at it in entirely practical terms, going almost back to where I was in the beginning when I tried to see some way that made sense. And it did. It
Mm-hmm.
made sense to me that finally that no, it's not what I believe that's important, it's what I do. And I began to
Mm-hmm.
express that in meetings. And I started getting some criticism.
Can you tell me or tell the listeners what exactly you were expressing? I think that might be important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing is what's important for me is that I'm sober because of what I do, not because of what I believe. And it's other people that have helped me. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
God. And I reject the entire language of higher power and so forth. And
Yeah.
so where I knew I needed a divorce from my home group is we were having a meeting one time, and the topic was about how humans would fail us, and we had to have a belief in God, that only God could help us. It's crazy. And I remember at the meeting saying, no, that's not true for me, because there is no God, and people, sure, they can fail you, but that's all I have is people. And
Mm.
I can always reach a human being. I can always reach a human being.
Yeah.
I can't reach a God. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so I started getting some pushback, and
Mm-hmm.
that was really where I started having problems. Plus, also in the literature, there's some really incorrect descriptions of what an atheist and agnostic is, and there's a lot of pressure to not be that. But it was really this idea
Yeah.
that I had to have some sort of a supernatural power to stay sober that was a deal breaker for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do it anymore. I could not, I had to be who I was.
Yeah. Yeah. So you start to receive pushback from this home group and you decide, okay, this just isn't working for me anymore. So what steps did you take
Well,
next? Because these are the people that you counted on.
yeah. And that's what was so weird is these were people who I had known, literally many of them, for 25 years. And these are people who accepted me. And all of a sudden I wasn't getting that acceptance. It was a really difficult time. So I started searching, and even before my final break with my home group, I started searching for atheists and agnostics in AA specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there really wasn't a lot out there, but there was a little bit. There was a website that in New York, there was Roger's website, AA Agnostica. There was a few other websites out there. Anyway, I learned that there have been atheists and agnostics in AA since 1975, and there were actually specific AA meetings that were designed specifically for atheists and agnostics, and I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to meet these people online and connect with them. And next thing I know, they're having a conference in California, in Santa Monica. So I go to this conference in 2014, and now at this time I've already started an AA group in Kansas City for atheists and agnostics. I started that in
Okay.
July, in July of 2014, I guess. And in November of 2014, I go to Santa Monica and I meet all these people from all over the world who are atheists and agnostics in AA.
Mm-hmm.
And it just changed everything for me. It was
Mm-hmm.
huge. And actually I became more involved in my recovery and in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was just a huge deal for me. So that was the first conference that we ever had, and we've had now 3 of them. I've been to all of them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just been amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope to go to my first one. Well, it was supposed to be this year, but because of COVID-19, I guess it'll be next year. So.
They're really interesting. What you'll find is that there's a huge variety of even people who identify as an atheist. they can't agree on anything other than we don't want to drink. That's basically it. But you'll have atheists who pray. You'll have atheists
Yeah.
who for whom it's important to have a spiritual experience. Then you have atheists who absolutely cannot stand that and will loudly debate you for even thinking of such a thing. And so there's just a huge variety of thought, which makes it interesting because at your
Right.
typical AA event, it's like everybody's pretty much in agreement that there's, but at these AA conferences for atheists and agnostics, you don't have that sense of that so much. But I mean, it's kind of hard to explain. It's not all black and white like that, but there's
Yeah.
more variety, I guess, of experience than you might find otherwise. And people will find that interesting. I think
It's interesting.
yeah, you think that an atheist is just, one way, but no, there's a huge variance in how they approach the program. And I've actually evolved a lot over the years, over the last 5 years. I've changed my views and thoughts and probably will continue to.
Yeah. Yeah. I change them, I think, on a daily basis. So,
Yeah.
but I've heard people in my practice and on the podcast say that when if they've come from a religious background, when they are in complete crisis, even if they identify as an atheist, they hit their knees. They go straight to with some of those old and true sort of habits and beliefs. And so I find that interesting
And I
as
understand.
well.
I do the same thing. So I didn't grow up in a religion, but I grew up in AA. And the biggest the biggest thing in AA is the Serenity Prayer. Is huge, and I still to this day will recite the Serenity Prayer. And it's not that I think
Mm,
there's some God out there that's listening to me and giving me anything, but I'm just saying the words helps me. It comforts me, and there's a lot of truth in that prayer of seeking the serenity to accept things I can't change, wisdom to and courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to the difference. That just summarizes my how I like to live my life now. So that is
yeah.
still an important part of how I live, I guess, is to keep that prayer part of my
Yeah.
repertoire, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I feel like a lot of individuals that I talk to struggle with AA and not fitting in, and so it's good to know that you can leave your home group and have the courage to do so just by putting your recovery first. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, there are more and more now. There are a lot more secular AA groups, but you don't have to limit yourself to AA either. Recently, I took the SMART training
Hmm.
and to become a facilitator for SMART recovery. And I don't know if I will follow through with that or not. But it's kind of interesting because I finished my training during this time when all of the meetings are online. So I haven't actually been to a in-face smart meeting. So I've gone to some of the online meetings and they're huge right now because of COVID. And so there's be
Yeah.
like over 100 people in these meetings, but they're really interesting and they're very well presented. And so I've gotten a lot out of it. But
Hmm.
there are options out there for people besides just AA. You can go to AA meeting, you can go to a secular AA meeting, you can go to a smart meeting, all kinds of, and now more and more people are doing a lot of different sort of things online. In fact, I heard one of your guests in your podcast talk about, she likes to read recovery memoirs, and I love to do that too. And that's huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is an option. And AA is everywhere, and
Hmm.
the thing about AA, just like any other group, whether it be smart or anything else, your experience is going to depend upon whatever group you go to and whatever meeting you go to. There isn't just one way to say what AA is or what smart is. It's going to
Yeah.
depend upon that particular group of people that you're meeting with.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe just also, and I know this is hard, but to not be judgmental by going to different meetings,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Like of
yeah.
yourself, of others.
Yeah, that's what frustrates me the most about the recovery community, but it's mainly an online thing, is you've got a group of people who absolutely hate AA, and I understand that.
Mhm.
There have been people who've been harmed by Alcoholics Anonymous,
Mhm.
and they're just passionate against AA. And then you have people who are, in the smart camp and they think AA is bad. You got people in AA who think smart it's just crazy. but there's a whole new generation coming up who's like, oh, I just do whatever works for me.
Yeah, let's just build our own recovery system day by day.
Yeah, it's like my generation and the people older than me are fighting the culture wars still, but there's a whole other group of people that are coming up that really don't want to get involved with that, and they just want to do what works and what makes sense for them. And oftentimes that's just finding some friends to hang out with who support them.
Yeah, have the same goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, recovery goals.
Yeah.
So I thought we could switch gears now to talk about your rad podcast, AA Beyond Belief. It's been coming up on 5 years now, correct?
Yep. Be 5 years in September.
Yeah. So I want to read just a little bit about what AA Beyond Belief is. And it's more than just a podcast. So AA Beyond Belief is a refuge, a home in AA for agnostics, atheists, freethinkers, and all others who seek a secular path of recovery within Alcoholics Anonymous. And then you say the stories presented here reflect the broad and varied experience of those who choose to walk the secular path in AA. This is a big deal. I'm wondering what informed your decision to start this community?
So back in 2015, Roger C. from Hamilton, Ontario, he has a site called AA Agnostica, which is huge in the secular AA community. And he wanted to retire and stop posting articles. So he asked me if I would create a site to succeed that. And I said, sure. And so I created AA Beyond Belief, and I wanted to have a podcast component. At that time, I had been a guest on one podcast, and I was listening to podcasts, and I really liked them, and I just wanted to have that experience. So in September 2015, we started publishing articles, and the articles are written by people within the secular AA community, and we started the podcast as well. And so that's what we've been doing ever since. But that's the reason I started it. That's how I got involved with it and to begin with. Now, Roger never did retire. So now we have 2 websites, which is cool.
That's pretty funny. Yeah. And how, I think you asked me this question, and so I'm going to steal it from you. How did you transform from the beginning of starting this community till now?
Well,
I'm just looking back.
Yeah, it's broadened my world. I'm no longer limited to the people I know here in Kansas City. I have met people from literally all over the world, and I've had the opportunity to get to know them. And listening to a person's story, that's really an intensely personal experience. And to this day, all these people I've talked to, their stories are still in my head. They really have touched me deeply. Because when you're working on a podcast, it's not just the conversation that you're having at the time, but you later go back and you do the editing. So you're really listening to people. And I noticed that my listening skills have really improved quite a bit since I've been podcasting. In just my everyday conversations, I'm a bit of a better listener. So in that way, it's transformed me. It's sometimes overwhelming. I don't know how to describe this. I don't want to say it's overwhelming, but it's unbelievable when I hear from people who tell me, and the numbers of people who tell me that they are helped by that podcast. I never dreamed that it would touch so many people and make such a difference in a person's life. But I have had people write me and tell me that, and I just don't know what to do with that. It's like it's just incredible. But what it really is, it's not me. It's all these other people who come on the podcast and give this information. And when we're not sharing our personal stories, I've also talked to authors, doctors, and we've even looked at other recovery programs like Refuge Recovery and Smart Recovery and the Sinclair method, actually, which I find really an interesting way to recovery. So we also look at things outside of the typical AA box. So. But I think if anything's changed me so much is that fact that it has broadened it. I've learned more, and I feel more connected to people outside of my local community here.
Yeah, I love that. It just really expands your awareness when you're learning from people that aren't sort of in your wheelhouse, so to speak, that you would normally associate with. So
yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up today, I'm going to ask a question that a little out of the box, but if you could write a phrase or on a billboard, for all to see, what would it say?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, I would say that your recovery isn't about what you believe, it's about what you do. And that might be controversial. It's not what you believe, it's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a person's actions mean more than what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we focus on what the things that we do and the people that we know and less on the beliefs that we might hold, the better off that we'll be. Anyway, I hope that isn't too controversial, but I don't mean to be, because I'm not saying I don't respect people who have beliefs in gods and so forth. I really don't. I respect their beliefs, but I just like the idea that, focus on what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that might not be the best billboard in the world, but there you go.
Yes, but it's your billboard.
That's my billboard. I can change it.
You can. You can change it tomorrow if you want to.
Right. I probably will.
All right. How can people best find you on the social?
Okay, on social media, you can just search for AA Beyond Belief. We have a public Facebook page, and we also have a private Facebook group that you can join. You can find us on YouTube. Just search AA Beyond Belief. We have a YouTube channel, and there's a lot of stuff there. We're doing live streams now. If you're interested, we do live streams on Friday, 7:00 Central, 8:00 Eastern, where it's a lot of fun. It's a live podcast. We have people call in with questions and comments, and people also commenting in the chat room. It's a lot of fun. We do that every Friday. It's kind of like having a party and a meeting at the same time. Sometimes they're lighthearted topics, sometimes more serious, and it's just a lot of fun. So if you'd like to do that, you can find us on YouTube as well, and then on our website, aabeyondbelief.org. Yeah.
All right, John. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.